Greetings, it is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the second edition of AD&D. Of course, we were talking about encounters when we left off, and I was talking about the planned encounters you can have. Now, beyond the key encounters we talked about last time, there's another type of planned encounters, trigger encounters. Now, trigger encounters are intrinsically different than key encounters, but you can have both a key and trigger encounter occur at the same time, or you could have this trigger encounter separately. A triggered encounter basically is an encounter that you plan for a series of events that the actions that the players take influence this series of events. Now, their decisions, whether before the encounter occurs or during the encounter, are going to influence and change the results of what's going on. So effectively, this is an encounter that is based upon the actions that your characters are taking. To build one of these encounters, of course, you do want to establish a bit of details, but these encounters tend to be less detailed than key encounters. It's your choice whether you're going to focus on some of the details of the area they're in, the location, the creatures, the items, the things that you might focus more on a key encounter to establish it, but that's extra work on your end. Effectively, what you're going to do is first look at what will happen in this room, in this location, with this encounter, if the players do nothing. What happens if they do nothing? What is the series of events that comes out? And then you start to think, now, if I'm a player coming on this situation, what might I do? And I begin to list the effects that I might do. And for each of these things, I basically figure out how the situation might change. Now, of course, you're never going to be able to account for everything. And that's one of the major issues here, is accounting for every detail of what's going on. You can't. You can't predict that. You can predict your players by knowing them, but there can always be the circumstance where your player comes up with some kind of crazy idea far beyond anything you ever imagined, far beyond anything you could have planned for him to ever come up with. Something off the wall, but you got to be ready for it. That is where your skill as a dungeon master comes in, because it's time to improvise. You're going to have to be ready to improvise for those crazy questions. But the amount of information you should provide it should help you out a little bit. Whatever kind of ideas you had, maybe one of them is close enough that you can adapt it. Things like that that make it easier. That's why you want to make sure to answer your what results might be question as much as possible, with as much detail as possible for those. It will help you out if something crazy happens and you have to improvise. You've at least thought a lot about what's going on with this encounter and how influence of the players can change things. It's important to note that this encounter does involve creatures that you list the type of attacks that they might do, if it's a combat-based one, and the weapons that they're going to do. So those are the key details, a little trick of the words there, that you're going to need to know about beyond everything else, which I said, optional. Now the fact is, you can, of course, as I said, have both a key encounter and a triggered encounter at the exact same time. It has a different process for creating it, and it is a little bit more work, but it can make much more fulfilling and in-depth encounter, which adds to the essence of your world and the essence of the storyline you're going for. The fact is, the first thing you're going to do is to build out the key encounter effect of it. You define the location, the creatures or NPCs that are there, the items that are there, all the necessary details you normally would have built for your key encounter. But it's important to note, the details you work on now are the details which will never change. You can't change the room. You can't change the items. The item might get destroyed, but the item itself doesn't change for how it was described. That's what you're describing. The unchanging bits of information that are part of this entire encounter as you're building it. Once you've completed that, then you begin to put the events in play here. You're starting with the action part of this. It's what's going on, what event, what series of things are happening with this encounter in this place I just built. Now, the exact necessary details of it, again, is going to be completely up to you. And it is important to once again ask, how will my players react to this? What kind of things are they probably going to do? So it's the exact same problems for both of these you're going to have to work on. Level of detail and unpredictability. that both of these can be a problem for these two encounters, and you've got to watch them. And combined, you have to watch both of them at the same time. But the fact is, when you do both of these together for a planned encounter, it oftentimes can help out in your overall plot, as of course your encounter should link to that in some way, and of course it helps establish the continuity of your campaign world, because if they should return to this room and have some other kind of encounter there, the fact is a lot of the necessary details will stay the same. And it's a good way of establishing things, that if they're journeying into various places, you've got room A, place A established very well. And of course, again, yeah, you can reuse it all you want, or they could maybe never visit it again. But it adds to the possibilities of continuity and fixing things up right. Now, there is another type of encounter we do want to talk about. Random encounters. These are quite the opposite of planned encounters. Effectively, what it is a dungeon master at certain points in times will effectively roll an encounter die. And if this encounter die should say, your players are having an encounter now, you consult an encounter table to see what kind of encounter they're having. Now, encounter tables are provided usually by some kind of pre-made adventure, or if you are not using a pre-made adventure, the monster compendiums oftentimes have monster encounter tables in them that you can consult, and the fact is these encounter tables are not set in stone. You can customize them as is appropriate. If new monsters come out from various sources and new books, you can always add them in there, or you could switch out monsters as you feel it's appropriate. These are basically starting point tables that you're going to use because they fit within either a terrain they're defining, or if it's an adventure, within that adventure, and it will tell you what kind of areas you'd roll it in, and you get an idea of where you'd use these. Of course, you could always build your own as you feel appropriate, but that's something we're going to talk about in another episode. Now, the random encounter will determine the creature or NPC or event that's going to be taking place that the characters are going to encounter. And of course, most times random encounters are combat-based. They don't need to be. You can always talk out an encounter with an NPC if you really want to. Players have that option. It's just the sheer fact that intelligent things, yeah, you could try to talk them out with it. Non-intelligent, you're probably just gonna fight that. But then you do have that option that you don't always have to resort to violence. At least as players, which some do and some don't. That's up to your players and how they play. Now, of course, there are many that say random encounters are an unnecessary thing that people shouldn't use. The fact is the DM should control everything, and this removes a level of control from them. But it can be useful. Now, it can be, of course, abused. Too many random encounters, that's terrible. It overloads your players. Or maybe a random encounter that seems completely illogical. Why would this thing be in this place at this time fighting us? That doesn't make any sense. It can occur with how random encounter charts are built. It's up to you as the dungeon master to make you use them judiciously. You use them at the proper time, and you scale them to whatever appropriate setting you are. If you're in a dungeon, you make it appropriate to the dungeon you're in. If you're traveling across a terrain, whatever terrain it is that's appropriate. You have to make sure these encounter tables fit with your world. That removes the fact of illogical encounters happening, because you've made sure to eliminate them from your chart. You've watched that already. And then it's just using them properly. And the fact is, what they can do is they can add variety to the adventure. It can also be something that's unpredictable for players. If players are exploring a dungeon and all of your planned encounters have a certain theme to them, they're going to expect a certain type of creatures. Maybe they went in here to hunt down a bunch of kobolds. They're going to expect kobolds wherever they go. Putting in a random encounter of something completely different that might still fit within the purview of the adventure will throw your characters off and make them not be able to predict what's going to happen anymore. Maybe there's giant centipedes, which it happens that they raise and eat here. One got loose and your players ran into it and have to fight it now. They weren't expecting that. They didn't know the kobolds did that. They didn't know they raised them. Guess what? You've just made sure they don't predict you as much anymore. You've thrown them off a little bit. And that's the point of these, is not only to throw your characters off balance, add a little variety to the encounters, and it helps you as the dungeon master have a little bit more fun. Yeah, that's it. It helps you have more fun. Now, as I said, it is important to tailor these to the adventure, because the more it fits within the adventure, the less work you actually have to do when planning out random encounters, when building the table, or looking at them. Because if it feels like it's naturally part of what's going on, less you have to do. That's a very important part of it. So that's it for today. I talked more about encounters. I started with the last type of planned encounter, the triggered encounter, which is all about events. Some kind of series of events, which might be more combat-based, might be more talking-based, might be somewhere in between, or something else entirely. Whatever kind of event it is, the actions of your players influence it. And you're building it so that they can do various things, and various things will trigger along the way. Hence the name Triggered Event. That if they intercede in a kidnapping, guess what? They've changed things. Or if they don't, guess what? They haven't changed things, and you already planned out what would happen if they didn't help at all. You could also combine the key and triggered encounters, which, again, is a little bit more work because you're doing twice the work almost in a way, but it's also the best way to make the better encounters. The fact is that you have a bunch of stuff set in stone, and then you have a bunch of stuff that changes as a result of your character's actions. They feel a little more like it's a live world. You don't need to have both together. You can do them both separately, and there are times and places for both separately. But combining them, there's also a time and place. Then I moved on to talk about random encounters. They're usually found in some kind of table, which you could build yourself, or you could use one that's published in an adventure, or the monster compendiums. And it's just that, a random encounter. It's just some kind of monster, some kind of NPC, some kind of event that your characters happen upon by chance. And there's arguments against them. But used properly and tailored to the world you're building makes random adventures something that is just important for you as a dungeon master to use. Using them correctly. Using them right. In the next episode, we're going to dive a little bit more into random encounters, talking about random encounter tables, and sort of building them yourselves. We're going to dive into that a little bit. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows your support for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.